There is a moment most people never speak aloud. Not in church, not in small groups, not even in the quiet corner of a friendship you thought was safe enough to hold your darkest truths. It happens somewhere between midnight and 4 a.m., in a room where the walls are thin enough to hear the house breathe, but no one, not a single soul in that house, can hear what is shattering inside you. Your hands are trembling. Your chest feels like it has been filled with wet concrete, heavy and cold and setting. And you are counting things you should never have to count. Reasons, pills, the number of people who would notice the silence if you disappeared. And the count comes up heartbreakingly short. That moment, the one you have never dared to put into words, is the exact moment the prophecy written about you became undeniably, irrevocably real. Not the moment the breakthrough finally arrived. Not the morning the right door cracked open. Not the blessing, not the favor, not the long-awaited vindication when the people who doubted you had to eat their words. No, it was that one breath. The single, ragged, almost not taken breath you drew when every molecule of your being was screaming for you to stop. That breath was not you surviving by accident. That breath was the prophecy manifesting in real time, in real flesh, in real blood, through a real body that God refused to let go of even when you were willing to let go of yourself. You have been standing at the edge of your own story, squinting into the distance, waiting for God to finally do something. But here is what no one dared to tell you. God has been standing right beside you the entire time, not waiting to act, but waiting for you to see what you already did. You already walked through the fire. You already crossed the water. You already survived the thing that was designed to end you. And heaven has been watching, not with anxiety, not with uncertainty, but with the quiet, unshakable knowing of a creator who built you for exactly this. That is why in the trilogy, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, the link is in the pinned comment, I explain something that religion rarely touches, that the ones who carry the heaviest burdens are not the ones God forgot. They are the ones God trusted most. And trust of that magnitude does not come without a price. You were not put through fire to see if you could survive it. You were put through fire because God already knew you would. In Job 1:8, God does not turn to the enemy with nervous uncertainty and say, "Let us test my servant and hope for the best." God brags. He says, "Have you seen this one? Have you noticed him? There is no one like him on the entire earth." The trial was never a question about your strength. It was a showcase of it. Your suffering, every betrayal that blindsided you, every financial devastation that hollowed you out, every midnight prayer that seemed to dissolve into deafening silence. That was not God wondering about you. That was God proving something to the kingdom of darkness, using you as the living, breathing, unbreakable evidence. You were not being punished. You were being displayed. And the distinction between those two things is the difference between a life lived in shame and a life lived in authority. The enemy wanted you to read every wound as evidence of abandonment, but every wound was actually a credential being signed into your skin, a mark that said, "This one has been to the deep and came back carrying something that could not be manufactured any other way." And you did not earn your authority through achievement. You earned it through endurance. And endurance of the kind you have lived through is not something that can be faked, performed, or copied. It can only be forged. And so you walked into rooms, family rooms, church rooms, rooms full of people laughing and eating and existing with an ease you could never quite locate inside yourself. And you sat there with that strange ache behind your sternum, that low-grade grief of being surrounded and still profoundly, almost cosmically alone. Your body knew it before your mind would admit it, the tightness in your shoulders the moment you walked through certain front doors. The way your jaw clenched at tables where laughter was mandatory and honesty was silently forbidden. The exhaustion of performing wellness for people who needed you to be fine because your not being fine disturbed something fragile in the architecture of their own denial. That isolation was not rejection from God, it was installation by God. a direct, unobstructed line being constructed between your spirit and the voice that spoke the universe into being. And every unnecessary spiritual middleman, every relationship built on your silence and their comfort, every dynamic that required you to shrink to sustain it, was being systematically removed from the circuit, not cruelly, precisely. The way a surgeon removes what is strangling the healthy tissue, not to wound the body, but to save it. Every friendship that faded, every family dinner that left you emptier than when you arrived, every door that closed in your face, those were not failures. They were God clearing the frequency. And while the clearing was happening, something else was happening inside the flesh of you that you could not have seen with your natural eyes. The biological architecture of your resilience was being rebuilt at the cellular level of your courage. Do you understand what it does to a human nervous system to survive grief repeatedly and still choose to get up? Do you understand what it does to the interior wiring of a soul to pray through silence, to trust through absence, to love a God who feels hidden while your circumstances feel catastrophic? It rewires you. It literally alters the landscape of what you are capable of enduring. The people who hurt you were not just hurting you, they were unknowingly thickening your skin against every future rejection that will try to stop what you are about to do. Every manipulator who used you sharpened your ability to see manipulation from the length of a room. Every season of silence stripped away your dependence on human applause until the only validation that could move you was the voice that called you by your name before your parents had even thought of one. Your enemies were your armor smiths, every single one of them. Every attack made you denser. Every wound, when it finally closed, left scar tissue that was biologically, spiritually, structurally stronger than the original skin. This is not poetry. This is not a platitude designed to make the pain feel prettier than it was. This is the actual, documented, undeniable architecture of what God does with the ones he trusts most. He does not protect them from the fire. He lets them walk through it, and then he says, "Now look at what they are made of. Now see what they can carry." This is what no one tells the one who never quite fit inside the family system. The one who was too aware, too sensitive, too unwilling to pretend the house was peaceful when the whole structure was silently burning. You did not fail to belong. You outgrew the container. Your light did not shrink because the people around you could not see it. Their inability to see it is not evidence of your lack. It is evidence of your magnitude, because there are certain levels of anointing that are simply invisible to the eye that has not been trained to look for them, and the people in your immediate circle, the ones who dismissed you, questioned you, advised you to be less, they were not equipped to perceive what you carry, and that is not their fault, but it is also not your deficiency. The prophet Joseph was not rejected by his brothers because he was weak or deficient or wrong. He was rejected because he carried something they could not access and could not stand to be near. His very presence exposed what they lacked. His dreams were not a threat to their safety, they were a mirror to their smallness, and smallness does not tolerate mirrors. So they threw him into a pit. They stripped off the coat that symbolized his distinction and told themselves and their father a story that made his suffering someone else's doing. But here is what they did not know, could not have known, would never have anticipated. The pit was not the end of the story. The pit was the first hallway of the palace, and every injustice after, the false accusation, the prison, the years of being forgotten, each one was not a detour. Each one was a corridor that Joseph had to walk through in order to arrive at the room that had always been waiting for him. That is the pattern underneath your pattern. That is the thread running through everything you have endured. Not that the suffering was good. Do not let anyone reduce your pain to a tidy spiritual lesson as though the depth of what you carried was inconsequential. The suffering was real. The nights were real. The grief was real and heavy, and it had weight and texture, and it cost you things that still ache when the weather changes. But nothing, not one wound, not one betrayal, not one night of unanswered prayer, was wasted. Every piece of it was being woven, with a precision that exceeds human understanding, into something the enemy could not have anticipated. A warrior whose wounds are weapons, whose scars carry the authority of someone who has been to hell and returned with the keys. Your very presence in a room shifts something in the atmosphere that you are not even fully conscious of yet. There are people who bristle when you walk in without knowing why. There are atmospheres that become uncomfortable when you arrive because darkness does not coexist easily with the kind of light that has been refined through suffering. You have walked into conversations and felt the subtle shift, the way certain people become guarded, the way certain energies recalibrate. That is not paranoia, that is discernment. And discernment of that caliber is not a gift given to the comfortable. It is forged in the furnace of the ones who had to learn to navigate the unseen because the seen had already betrayed them too many times. The ones who called you too sensitive were the ones who could not afford to feel what you feel. The ones who called you too intense were the ones who had long since made peace with living on the surface. The ones who called you difficult were the ones who needed you to be easy in order to remain unchallenged in their own stagnation. Their criticism was not a revelation about your nature. It was a revelation about their ceiling, and you were never meant to live under someone else's ceiling. You were built for open sky. As I teach deeply in the material, The 3 Keys to a Prosperous Life, I left the link for you in the pinned comment. This pain is not the end of your story. It is the exact evidence that you were chosen before the foundation of the earth for an assignment that requires someone who has been to the bottom. Because the assignment that is waiting for you on the other side of this wilderness, it does not need someone polished by comfort. It needs someone tempered by fire. It needs someone who has looked into the void and chosen to stay. It needs someone who cannot be manipulated by the threat of loss because they have already lost everything and discovered in the rubble of everything they thought they needed that God was still standing there, still present, still faithful, still building. Think about David for a moment. Not the David of the Psalms that get quoted at graduations and on inspirational calendars, but the actual David, the one who spent years hiding in caves while the man who was supposed to protect him tried repeatedly to end his life. The one who was anointed king and then immediately sent back to the fields. The one whose closest companion became the target of his king's jealousy. The one who wrote his agony into songs because there was no one left in his earthly circle who could hold the weight of what he was carrying. David did not become the man after God's own heart because his life was easy. David became the man after God's own heart because he kept turning toward God in every season where turning away would have made perfect sense. He kept worshiping in the cave. He kept writing in the wilderness. He kept choosing faith in the dark, and the dark did not define him, it developed him. And then there is the one who was called the Son of God, who walked through the full spectrum of human rejection, misunderstood by his family, hunted by religious leaders, abandoned by his closest friends in his darkest hour, and who still looked out from the cross and said, "Father, forgive them." Not because the rejection did not wound him, it did. Not because the abandonment did not feel like abandonment, it felt like exactly what it was, but because something in him was anchored to a reality that the immediate experience could not dismantle. He was connected to a truth that was older and deeper than the pain of the present moment. And that connection, that unshakable, tested, fire-refined tether to the voice that called him beloved, is the same connection that has been growing in you through every season you thought was destroying you. The danger right now is not the enemy outside you. The danger is the one inside you that keeps looking backward. You know the story of Lot's wife. She was being led out of a city that God himself had declared a place of no return. She had been told explicitly, do not look back. Not because God is cruel and issues arbitrary commands to test obedience, but because looking back at a burning city while you are still in the blast radius will stop your feet, will turn what is behind you into a gravity that overpowers the pull of what is ahead. She did not look back because she missed the city. She looked back because part of her identity was still buried in it. Because the familiar, even when it is toxic, exerts a pull that feels like belonging. Because leaving requires you to release not just the place, but the version of yourself that was shaped there. And so, here is the question that matters more than almost any other question in this season of your life. What are you still looking back at? Which abandoned approval are you still craving from the people who could never actually see you? Which old version of yourself are you still grieving? The one that was smaller and quieter and more palatable to the room, the one that did not make people uncomfortable with the depth of your awareness. Which past wound are you visiting at midnight, pressing your finger into it to confirm it is still there, still real, still yours? Because every moment you spend turned toward what is behind you is a moment that your feet are not moving toward what is ahead. And what is ahead cannot afford for you to be frozen. What is ahead requires your full, forward-facing, unencumbered motion. The solitude you have been walking through is not a punishment for something you did wrong. It is a preparation for something you are about to do right. There is a particular kind of person who can only be made in solitude. Not the kind of solitude that is chosen and comfortable and filled with books and candles and intentional silence, but the involuntary solitude, the one that comes when the crowd thins and the phone stops ringing and the invitations stop coming, and you are left in a quiet that is so loud it becomes its own kind of noise. That solitude is where the systemic chains of your family line get identified, named, and broken. Because in the noise of belonging to a group, you adopt the group's wounds without realizing it. You carry the unspoken grief of your parents, the unprocessed trauma of your grandparents, the inherited patterns of rejection and survival and smallness that were never yours to carry in the first place. In the solitude, you finally get to set them down. You finally get to look at what you were handed versus what you actually are. And what you actually are, stripped of the family script, stripped of the social performance, stripped of every identity that was constructed by someone else's need, is something far more powerful than anything you were told to be. You are the one in the lineage who broke the pattern. You are the one who felt the pull of the familiar and chose differently. You are the fracture point in a generational story that was heading in one direction, and you turned it. That is not a small thing. That is a legacy-defining, eternity-altering thing. And the people who come after you, your children, your spiritual children, the ones who will sit in rooms you have not yet entered and hear words you have not yet spoken, they will walk in freedom that you purchased with your pain. The old tribe had a role to play in your story, and that role is finished. The relationships that were built on your performance of wellness, your management of other people's comfort, your willingness to make yourself smaller to keep the peace. Those relationships served a season, and the season is over. And the grief of that is real. Do not rush past the grief. Let it be what it is. Because you loved those people. Because some of them were not malicious. They were simply limited, operating from their own unexamined wounds, giving you the only version of love they knew how to give. You can grieve the relationship you deserved while releasing the one that actually existed. Both things are true at the same time. But you cannot let grief become a residence. You cannot furnish the house of your past with such comfort that you forget it was never meant to be your permanent address. The new connections assigned to your next season are not hypothetical. They are not a spiritual consolation prize for the relationships you lost. They are specific, named, already in motion souls who have been prepared by their own fire to meet you at the level you are actually at. Not the performance level, not the managed level, but the full, unedited, wilderness-refined, scar-bearing real level of who you are. And they will not ask you to be smaller. They will not be threatened by your light. They will recognize it because they carry something similar, forged in a similar fire. And the recognition between you will feel less like meeting someone new and more like finally being seen by someone who actually knows how to look. God has been removing what was diluting you. Every relationship that required your diminishment was consuming resources, emotional, spiritual, creative resources that belonged to your assignment. Every dynamic that fed off your silence was drinking from a well that was meant to water something else entirely. The removal was not punishment, it was resource recovery. And what is being recovered is being redirected right now toward the hands and the season and the people who will use it for what it was always intended for. The ones who counted you out are not your concern. What they think, what they say, how they process the version of you they could not accommodate, that is their work to do, and it belongs entirely to them. Your work is to stop needing their revision of your story to match reality. Your story does not require their endorsement to be true. Your anointing does not require their acknowledgement to be active. The proof of what you carry is not found in their ability to finally see it. The proof is in your own history, in every evidence of survival, in every morning after a night that should have been your last, in every season where the resources ran out and somehow, inexplicably, they did not fully run out, in every moment where God was supposed to be absent and yet something held. Count them on your fingers. Go back through your own timeline and count every single moment that should have broken you and did not, every betrayal, every financial collapse, every diagnosis, every loss, every closed door, every midnight of silence. Count them. Look at your hands. That is not a list of trials. That is a list of proofs. A fingerprint-specific, divinely authored, irrefutable catalog of evidence that you are exactly who God said you were before the first cell of your body was formed. The strongest warrior, the chosen one. The one who does not quit, even when quitting, would make complete, rational, utterly understandable sense. And right now, in this exact season, something is shifting in the unseen realm that your natural eyes are just beginning to catch the edge of. The resources assigned to your purpose are being rerouted. The doors that have been closed are beginning to experience a pressure from the other side, a pressure that is not yours to manufacture. You will simply need to be present when you hear the click. The people who belong to your next chapter are already in proximity, already aligned, already moving toward the same point where your path is heading. And the atmosphere around you is already beginning to change in ways that are subtle now, but are about to become impossible to miss. The boot camp is over. Read that again and let it settle into the part of you that is still bracing for more blows. The wilderness season has a discharge date, and it is not somewhere vague in the distant future. It is closer than your current circumstances have allowed you to believe. What is coming next is not more wilderness. It is the assignment you were built for, the one that required someone who has been to the bottom and came back not empty, but full of the kind of wisdom that cannot be taught in comfortable rooms, full of the kind of authority that only comes from having survived what should have destroyed you, full of the kind of compassion that can only be held by someone who has personally stood in the dark and felt the specific weight of that particular darkness. You are not who you were, the person who was defined by the wound, who was shaped by the rejection, who measured their worth by the rooms that would not let them in. That person has been undergoing a transformation that is almost complete. You are standing at the threshold of the version of yourself that the trial was always building toward, and the step from here to there is not a leap of faith across an impossible distance. It is a single step forward, made from the ground you are already standing on. with the authority you already carry, in the direction of the assignment you were already chosen for. Stop looking for the prophecy in the horizon of your future. It already came. It came every time you chose to stay. Every time you rose from the floor. Every time you whispered, "I trust you," to a God who felt absent. Every time you showed up for one more day when the math of your pain said there should not have been one more day. You are not waiting to be activated. You are already active. Heaven has already written the chapter that comes next. And it begins the moment you walk like you know what you already are. You are never going back. And what is coming next will make everything you survived make sense in a way that takes your breath for an entirely different reason. Not because of the weight of it, but because of the beauty of how it was all connected, all purposed, all woven together by hands that never once let go of you, even in the hours when you were certain you had been forgotten. You were never forgotten. You were being forged, and the forging is finished. It is time to walk. If there is a part of you that still doubts whether you can carry what is coming, if there is still a voice that says the damage was too deep, the delay was too long, the wounds were too many, I want you to find the link in the pinned comment and study the 3 keys to a prosperous life. Because inside that material lives the specific, practical, spiritually grounded framework for the person who has survived the fire and now needs to learn how to walk in what the fire produced. You were not brought through hell so you could stand at the edge of your breakthrough paralyzed by everything it cost you. You were brought through so you could step fully, permanently, and irrevocably into the life that God built all of this to prepare you for. The link is in the pinned comment. Go get what was always meant for you. There is a particular kind of silence that follows the storm. Not the silence of emptiness, not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of completion. The kind that settles over a battlefield after the last weapon has been laid down, after the last wall has fallen, after the last enemy has retreated from ground they could not hold. That is the silence you are standing in right now. Even if your circumstances have not fully caught up to the spiritual reality of what has already been decided about you. Because in the realm where your story was written before your first breath, the verdict is already in. The case has already been closed, and the ruling was not against you. It was never against you. It was always, irrevocably, cosmically in your favor. You have to understand something about the nature of what you have been carrying, the weight you have felt in your chest, the one that made ordinary mornings feel like climbing mountains, the one that made you rehearse conversations in the shower that you would never actually have, the one that settled over you at family gatherings like a frequency no one else in the room could hear. That weight was not evidence of your weakness. It was evidence of your sensitivity to things that matter. Weak people do not feel that kind of weight. Shallow people do not carry that kind of grief. The ones who feel everything at the depth you feel it are the ones who were designed to translate that depth into something that changes the people around them. You were not born too sensitive for this world. This world was built for people exactly like you to come along and make it feel something real again. And the relationships that dissolved, the friendships that faded without a clean ending, the family bonds that grew strained under the pressure of who you were becoming, the connections that simply could not survive the version of you that was emerging from the fire. Those losses were not evidence that you are hard to love. They were evidence that you are impossible to contain, because there are certain kinds of growth that are incompatible with certain kinds of environments. A tree that has outgrown its pot is not defective. It is not broken. It is not wrong for needing more room than the container was built to hold. It simply needs to be transplanted into the ground that matches the root system it has grown, and everything it was unable to become inside, the limitation will begin to unfold in the open space of the soil that was always meant for it. That is you, right now, in this exact moment, being transplanted. And transplanting is uncomfortable. It involves uprooting, And uprooting involves exposure, and exposure involves a vulnerability that feels terrifyingly close to the kind of vulnerability that has hurt you before. But the exposure is temporary. The roots will find the new ground. The roots always find what they need when they are placed in the right environment. And God is not a careless gardener. He does not uproot what he has spent years growing without knowing exactly where it is going to be replanted. The destination is prepared. The soil is ready. The conditions are already in place for everything that was stunted in the wrong environment to finally, fully, audaciously bloom. Think about what it means that you are still here, not in an abstract gratitude journal kind of way. Actually think about it. Think about the specific nights, the specific moments, the specific calculations your mind made when hope had evacuated the premises, and all that was left was the arithmetic of your pain. You ran those numbers. You know what they added up to. And yet here you are, on the other side of that math, reading these words, breathing this breath, carrying a heart that has been broken and broken again and repaired again until the repair work itself became a kind of architecture. A structure built not from the original material, but from the accumulated testimony of every time you did not stay broken. You are a living cathedral of survived impossibilities. And that is not metaphor. That is your actual biography. The enemy understood something about you before you understood it about yourself. That is why the attacks were so specific. That is why the warfare was so personal. You do not send heavy artillery against something ordinary. You do not dedicate that kind of targeted, sustained, multi-front assault to someone who poses no threat to your kingdom. The intensity of what came against you was always a revelation of the intensity of what lives inside you. The magnitude of the assignment you were given, the scale of the impact you were designed for, the scope of what your life, fully surrendered and fully activated, would do to the structures of darkness that have been operating unchallenged in the spaces you are about to enter. They knew. They knew before you knew. And everything they sent to stop you only served to prepare you for the very confrontation they were trying to prevent. So let this land in the deepest part of you. You did not survive by accident. You did not make it to this side of your worst night through luck or coincidence or the random kindness of an indifferent universe. You made it because something was holding you that was stronger than everything trying to pull you under. You made it because the hand that formed you before the foundation of the world did not release you in the dark. You made it because you were never actually alone in those rooms, never actually abandoned in those silences, never actually